Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for joining us at our presentation on healing and accountability for youth, a restorative justice disposition program in Hennepin County Court. Thank you all for joining us, and we are delighted to be able to share with you about our program. One of the things I want to do first is just acknowledge the fact that the program came together and was inspired by the International Academy of Trial Lawyers, where they were doing some work in Canada and got introduced to restorative justice through the Peace Building Conference, wanted to learn more about how they could use restorative justice more in their work, and then connected with the Legal Rights Center in Minneapolis. And then the Legal Rights Center connected with some of their partners, which we will be introducing ourselves in just a second here. But it's deeply founded, our work is deeply founded and grounded in community partnership. So I wanted to make sure that we started off with knowing that, how we got started. So I'll introduce myself first. I'm Dr. Talea Tolfree, and I am the founder and CEO of Koinonia Leadership Academy.
Good morning and welcome. I'm Bo Raura. I'm the Youth Restorative Justice Initiative Lead at the Legal Rights Center.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alyssa Benson. I'm a program manager with Hennepin County Juvenile Probation.
Good morning. I'm Cynthia Prosek, Executive Director of Restorative Justice Community Action.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Cara Beckman. I'm a Senior Program Evaluator at the University of Minnesota's Healthy Youth Development Prevention Research Center.
Good morning. I'm Ashley Melanson. I'm a Corrections Unit Supervisor in Hennepin County Juvenile Probation.
All right. So we are going to start with our slide pointing to how some of our systems are, how our program is working across systems. And first we want to start with what does this work kind of look like when we're talking about school systems? And we know that the pipeline to prison starts in schools. And so what our work around restorative justice, what that might look like in schools is how do we support schools and engaging our students in a more restorative way to avoid criminalization, to avoid punitive practices like expulsion and suspensions, and to build relationships with our students and families as a way of creating a climate shift in our schools so that our schools are more engaging, more focused on the values and relationship building of our students versus not allowing our students voice and not allowing them opportunity to work through situations as they arise. And then we look at what is happening with the practices that we're using in our police section here. What are the practices that are we using in our in diversion, and how might our police have opportunity and access to be able to use restorative practices, restorative justice in their practices as well? Looking also at the prosecutor point, where are those opportunities for prosecutors to use restorative justice and restorative practices in their work? And how can we support that work so that we can change the trajectory of our youth, as we know that a lot of the charges that youth are being charged with, some of those activities we know are developmentally appropriate activities, but yet they are being charged in a very punitive manner. And so what we're focusing on today is the post-charge, and our presentation is really focusing on what can we do post-charge in our system, and that's where we're going to look at our youth restorative justice program. And we're using, when we talk about restorative practices, we're really talking about what is the mindset that we're using as we're engaging with our youth and with families. And a lot of people have a lot of ways for which they define restorative practices or restorative justice. And for us, we're really grounded in the indigenous practices of restorative practices. Restorative practices is actually an indigenous practice that has been used for generations and generations. And so taking that indigenous practices, looking at the values and belief systems of our students, of our youth, of our community, and how do we build upon those values and belief systems, and how do we allow people the opportunity to be able to engage in a values, human-centered way. And so some of that work happens in circles. So people have heard of restorative circles. Some of that work happens in restorative circles. Some of it happens in mediation, where we have restorative mediation. And then some of it happens in community conferencing. Some of it happens in family group conferencing. So these are a number of options where we can use that restorative mindset that is human-centered and value-based, instead of the punitive way that the system has sort of penalized our youth and our families. And so again, when we talk about systems change, we're talking about systems change at all of those touch points that we just talked about in our previous slide. And this is a huge systems change for the court system, right? So typically judges and prosecutors, they have a lot of power and a lot of decision making, which they still do. But in this process, this allows for us to use that restorative mindset across multiple systems. And so the work that we're going to talk to you about today, judges actually, if they order our program to a youth and family, after they order it, there's nothing else that they order. They just order this program. Traditionally, they would make orders as far as what program the youth should be involved in, what evaluation should take place, and a number of other things. But for this program, they're actually giving up some power and allowing this youth to be assigned to our program, enrolled into our program, and then have this opportunity to work through the piece that brought the situation that brought them to our program in a restorative way. We're grounded in equity. Everything we do, we're looking at equity. We're looking at the disparities in our criminal legal system. We're looking at, who is having access to restorative options, who is not having access to restorative options. So we're looking at all of those pieces as we're working through our program. And then our program is definitely really deeply based in community. And as you will see, our community partners have specific roles that we operate in. We work very collaboratively together. And we're also working very, very close with youth and family. So in our program, youth and family have a lot of voice. They have a lot of opportunity to put forth their values and their belief systems, opportunities to have other community members participate in the process. So it's deeply rooted in community. And then we're also looking at what sustainability might look like. We want this program to be able to be sustainable. So our youth have opportunity, youth and families always have opportunity to access our program. And we're also looking at how can we replicate this in other cities, other states that would like to have an opportunity to transform sort of the way our youth are being connected in community, and when they when they're touching the criminal legal system, what opportunities might we have available for them. And so this is our Youth Restorative Justice Disposition Program in Hennepin County Juvenile Court. And as you see, there's a number of touch points that happen with our youth in our community. And our objective here is to give our youth an alternative to the traditional approach that they may have when they are in the system. And so our approach is really, again, about giving them voice, giving them opportunity to be able to make decisions for themselves, and opportunities to be held accountable for the situation that brought them into our program. So we're gonna, at each touch point, we'll show you how our community partners work together.
I had to take myself off of mute. You think I'd be used to this by now. In terms of eligibility, the young people that are eligible for our program must be 14 to 17 years old at the time of disposition, residents of Hennepin County. And the reason we include that is we don't supervise young people that are not residents of our county. Those young people are transferred to other counties on a supervised probation, so they can access our community-based array of services if those are something that comes out of the circle. And then any offenses eligible except domestic assault, criminal sexual conduct offenses, and young people that are designated as extended jurisdiction juvenile.
So we do a screening process on the probation side. So there are touch points in the court process that youth are in front of a judge and with their attorney, and we screen them out at the pretrial. So it's usually about their second appearance in court. We use the predetermined eligibility criteria that Alyssa just mentioned, and we notify via email at the time parties prior to their court date to let them know that this client and youth is eligible to participate in the program. And we also notify RJCA, Restorative Justice Community Action. They have a representative that appears at court at each one of those hearings, and they meet with the youth prior to court to explain the program, which I believe Cynthia will go into next.
Yeah, so when RJCA finds out about youth being eligible, we go to court, and if the youth and the defense attorney say, yep, let's have a conversation. So then we meet with the youth. Sometimes the defense attorney is there if they don't know about our process much. And what we do is we talk about what does this model look like and how is it different from the traditional system, really explaining, that this is the opportunity for the youth to make decisions around how best to help them move through this process, and that they have the support of all of the circle keepers, of the probation officer, and any other support that they want to bring in to help develop their pathway through the process. So we talk about what it looks like. We don't talk about what they did at that time, what got them into the system. We talk about the process, because this is where they are making a decision whether or not they want to choose this process versus the traditional court process, where they will be assigned things by that's decided by probation officers, prosecutors, judge, and all. But this, so we're giving them an opportunity to be at the center of those decision making and knowing who they want there to support them through this process. If they choose to move forward, we take all their information, we forward that to the court, and then we will get response after decisions made that they have been dispositioned to restorative justice.
And so like Cynthia was just explaining, at disposition, also known for adult sentencing, the youth and family decide if a restorative practice option is what they want to move forward with through their defense attorney. They'll ask the court to order the restorative practices at that time, after a factual basis has been established on the record, either through a plea or following a trial. And if the youth wants to proceed with a restorative practice disposition, but other parties don't agree, the court gets the opportunity to make the decision at that point as to whether the youth will receive the restorative practice option. And if the youth and family don't want to participate for whatever reason in restorative practice process, the youth get to continue in the traditional court process, because voluntariness and consent are important to restorative practices. So what that will entail following that point, it includes an order to commit to the developing and following of a restorative community commitment plan. Restitution, depending on what behavior brought the youth into court, might include an order for restitution. They can still order a restitution study like in traditional legal system, if that hasn't already been completed. If it's ordered by the court, parties may ask that the court order restitution based on the study, with an alternative amount to be determined through the restorative process if the victim chooses to participate in the restorative practice. And the youth will have the right to challenge that. So that part doesn't change necessarily. The youth can still challenge the court-ordered restitution based on a restitution study if that component is not a part of the circle.
So once the court orders it, then RJCA, we are informed about the case being assigned to restorative justice, the disposition program. So once we receive all the documents, which include the police reports, the orders, we review it to see like who may best be suited to be partnered with this youth for our community circle keepers. We have 2 circle keepers to be part of that process. So we want to balance like the gender dynamics, make sure that people have somebody in their group that represents them. So once we receive all that information, we help to assign the community circles keepers. And then what we do is then they get to review all the documentation so that they can move forward, fully engaged with where the youth starts from. But we really center it around the story and the narrative from the youth's perspective. And I believe Dr. Tolfree will get more into that.
All right. So during our intake process, we meet families in community, sort of talk through again what this restorative process will look like. Also offering families the opportunity to decide who will engage with you during this process, who is your support team. And we give them an opportunity to invite anyone that they feel comfortable walking through this process with them. And so after we kind of talk through that process, who will support them, we also do some relationship building there, talking about their strengths. What are the strengths that they bring? We allow the youth to voice that for themselves. We also allow family members to voice the strengths that the youth has. So it's really centered on a strength-based approach and a humanizing approach. So humanizing the situation, making sure that we're working from the value and belief systems of the family and coming together in that process so that we are operating together as a collective through this process. As we begin to talk about the restorative process, we're also thinking about how victims will be a part of this process. And so we give an opportunity for victims to be a part of the process. We don't often have victims that say they want to participate, but they are extended the opportunity to be a part of the process. And any other stakeholders that our youth and family feel like should be a part of the process are welcome to be a part of the process. So with the restorative process, we begin, after we do the intake, then we begin to sort of form our circle. So we've been talking about restorative mindset, we've been talking about restorative practices, restorative justice. This is when we actually get into the activity of having a restorative circle. And so at that restorative circle, again, the youth, the family, if the victim decides to be a part of the process, they're allowed to be a part of the process, and then also other community members. And in this process, we're really digging deeper into who is this youth, how do we humanize this event, how are we using values and belief systems to sort of guide us through the process. The PO is a very, very crucial part of the circle and the process. As the PO continues to do the job of a PO, if there are services, if there are opportunities that the PO thinks would be helpful for the youth, that's all decided by the circle. So a huge difference here is that we don't have POs or judges or attorneys saying what the youth needs to do and how the youth needs to do it. Rather, it's brought up in the circle, it's discussed as a collective in the circle process, and then it's decided by the circle how the youth would move forward. And then you can go to the next slide, Cara. And then some people think that, oh, when you do this restorative process, there's no accountability for youth. It's kind of sort of a slap on the wrist and then they're done. But that's not really true. So in our process, we make sure that there is a level of accountability, and also we take the time with the youth to be able to develop a sense of empathy around what has happened. And so our restorative community commitment plan is developed in that circle process. And that plan, we go through the process of asking the youth, what are some of the things that you think you need to improve on? What are some of the short-term goals, long-term goals that we can help you with and support you with? And what other supports do you think you need to sort of move your life forward in a positive way? And that commitment plan, the youth is held to all of those goals that they put in that commitment plan. And so we work as a team to be able to help the youth to achieve that plan. A part of that plan is also, how do I repair harm with the person that I cause harm to? What might that look like? What supports do I need for that? And so there's constant check-ins with the youth, even when we're not in circle. So we'll have circle every other week, every week. It just depends on what the youth needs. But in between those circles, there's also constant contact and constant coaching with the youth that helps the youth to arrive at a place of empathy, arrive at a place of accountability. And some might say, you know, why are you working on school goals, or why are you working on community goals? All of that impacts how the youth made a decision to be in the situation that they're in. And so we know it's very important for us to work on those goals and to also give youth strategies, leadership skills before they leave our process. You can go to the next. And then near the end of our process, we do a restorative review of what's been taking place over the course of the time that the youth has been in the program. And we kind of evaluate, how did the youth navigate through this process? Was this a successful process, or do we need more time to work through this process? What are some of the things that still need to be worked on, or have we achieved everything? And so when we do that celebration circle, then after that, though, the sort of results of the process and what has happened over the course of the time of them being in the program gets reported back to the court.
So that deep work that is being held in community and the accountability to the commitment plan then gets taken back to the court. And so there was a timeline originally ordered in the court order, and the restorative practice practitioner reports that to the court and stakeholders. And if the youth have successfully followed up on those accountability measures and all of the folks who had different commitments within that plan that Dr. Tolfree was talking about, then probation will ask the court to discharge probation and close the case. If for some reason that the youth has not successfully completed the restorative process, probation might at that point ask to continue probation to create more space and time for the youth to complete whatever commitments there might have been around a certain piece in the commitment plan, or to re-engage the family in the process. Or probation at that point might ask for a different outcome that comes derived from the traditional court process. It could also include recommendations from the restorative community circle to the court on what is needed to move forward. So those things might be taken back to the court at that point. And then
yes, and then after that process, the youth is restored back to community. And sometimes when we say youth restored back to the community, this wasn't out of home placement. So when we say restored back, we mean that they have taken responsibility and accountability for what brought them there, the relationships that may have been broken are now healing. And so this whole process has been a healing process for the youth, for their family. And again, sometimes victims are a part of the process. We've had cases where mom was the victim, and mom was a part of the process, and healing took place in the circle process. And so just restoring back as many relationships that have been broken, the youth is viewed as being restored back to community, and having support systems and resources to be able to move forward in a positive manner.
Thank you. So my role in this project has been to collaborate with this wonderful group of people to design and implement ways to increase our understanding of how this approach to accountability compares to the approaches traditionally used in courts and probation. The results I'm going to share from the first 19 cases. So that was our pilot time. It has now moved into kind of more sustainable continued work. But these are going to be some of the results from the first 19 cases. Because it's the first 19 cases, we aren't yet at a point where looking at comparison data makes sense, but our next steps do include a comparison group, looking kind of back at a similar group that went through or is going through the traditional process. So we can really kind of look at how this process holds up relative to traditional probation approaches. When we do evaluation, we really want to focus on co-developing our evaluation plan. So as a pilot, we knew we needed to gather multiple perspectives using both qualitative and quantitative methods. So much storytelling happens in restorative processes. We want to make sure we are able to kind of understand the richness of that and the value of that. We also wanted to make sure we included methods that would capture the positive outcomes that are consistent with the theory of restorative practices, and not limit our outcome measures to whether certain negative outcomes are reduced, but also whether some of the positive outcomes are increased. So we're going to take a look at what some of those have been. And as I mentioned, as a pilot, right, our kind of initial take at this was really kind of these typical evaluation questions of can this even work in a system that wasn't designed to really function this way? And then, of course, will people find it meaningful? Will they find it acceptable? So a couple of those snapshots of the feasibility aspects are that 19 of 19 completed that intake process. So when they said, yes, this is the disposition that I want, and the court ordered that disposition, 19 of 19 people, right, because it takes place at court, were able to get through that. And then kind of through those different steps that my colleagues just went through, right, by and large, most people completed all of those. 13 got to the point where they fully completed the commitment plan and got to have that celebration. So that was kind of the lower end of the feasibility. That's still 68%. So again, like, you know, we'll be comparing this to the traditional process. But kind of that midpoint, that meaningfulness, where we really feel like the theory of restorative practices would say that something, you know, this opportunity that Dr. Tolfree was talking about to really develop empathy, to really kind of hear multiple perspectives, to work through what it means to be accountable to a group of people. Nearly 4 in 5 youth made it through that point. So 79%, or 15 of the initial 19, participated in at least 2 circles and developed a commitment plan, which means they got to that point, right, of experiencing a process grounded in the values. So that that wordle you see on the screen, right, is a wordle of all the values that came up when young people, families, and in circle, right, were asked to say, how do we want to ground this process? They wanted to ground that process in hope, trust, and respect, right? Patience, community, honesty. That's what their value statement said they wanted to do. And then with acceptability, meaningfulness, we looked at many ways of doing that. There were surveys, there were reflections by circle keepers, and then those reflections by circle keepers often shared what people said in the last circle. But ultimately, one of the most meaningful pieces of the way we looked at this was a qualitative analysis of commitment plans. And that analysis showed that those commitment plans really had 3 themes in the things that they asked young people to do. They asked young people to make things right. So that's that repair of harm piece Dr. Tolfree was talking about. They asked young people and their families to really think about and figure out a plan for, you know, what were the underlying needs that caused this, that influence this behavior. So that's exactly what Dr. Tolfree said, was like, well, I was feeling really disconnected from school, or I am feeling, I was feeling really stressed out about school. I was feeling stressed out about all the things my family is going through. So then what is needed to kind of change those conditions so that we're preventing something in the future? And then how do we do that restoration, restore our path to a positive future? What is your dream for yourself? How do we get you back on track for that? Because we believe in you as a community. So those were the kind of 3 pieces that made up that were the themes of those accountability plans. And then interviews and reflections just showed kind of pretty consistently the different stakeholders' perspective that this really felt like a more meaningful process than what often happens. So this quote that's on your screen by a probation officer was pretty emblematic of those kind of quotes. This one specifically saying, I told the judge, this is so much more meaningful than having a kid pick up garbage on the side of the road on the weekend. So that's the kind of data that helped us understand that this was likely to be feasible and meaningful. And then we wanted to also look at impact, and we primarily did that qualitatively. So I'd love to just give you a minute to read some of these quotes. These came through qualitative data on surveys, they came through closing circle notes, and they came through formal reflections that circle keepers were asked to do. And they're really typical of the data. Our analysis of this data revealed that there's strong early evidence of positive impact, exactly because young people are experiencing the kind of process they need to learn and grow from a mistake. So in particular, we saw extensive qualitative data pointing to growth and perspective taking, ability to be vulnerable with a group of people, to really express their needs and ask for support in meeting those, and then developing empathy. Right, so Trent, you see that I didn't get it now, I really get it now, I didn't at first, I've transformed, those kind of quotes. We also saw extensive evidence of healing relationships. And especially at this developmental stage, how being accountable to people, rather than kind of having something imposed on them, but experiencing that accountability to people leading to feelings of self-worth and better relationships. And that really came, we also saw an evidence of a theme of that process of working through hard feelings. People talked about like really wanting their parents to be present, but also feeling really ashamed at their behavior. And so being able to work through that shame in a supportive circle, being able to work through feelings of being overwhelmed and getting support on what other ways can we work through those. So working through those hard feelings and then seeing the growth in relationships and respect that can come by doing so. So, right, really like being a part of this and seeing dad come around from, maybe feeling a sense of disappointment in a young person to feeling really proud in a young person, and a young person being able to see that in their dad, right? You can imagine how that really impacts and heals relationships. So those were the kind of themes that we saw around like what a young person experiences that are in alignment with their needed growth and development. And then what we took from that, our key insights related to this finding, is that these aspects are really critical elements of healthy youth development. And that comes through this really essential opportunity to make things right as a part of accountability. So relying on punishment or sanctions can actually deny children and youth of their opportunity to learn from mistakes and impedes their growth and development. Whereas this process really gave them an opportunity to make things right in a way that aided their growth and development. So that we, as we look at probation reform, we're kind of differentiating that opportunity to make things right in community as distinct from more common processes to realign kind of opportunities and consequences, right? We see a lot of like, if we have more opportunities and fewer consequences, that's what we need from probation reform. This is actually saying we're missing the boat on that if we don't ask for these meaningful accountability processes. So with that, I think what we wanted to do next was just make sure that we addressed any gaps that might have been left in terms of how we work together in this partnership. I think you've gotten an understanding of my role, so I'll pass it on to others for kind of any clarifications of what else you do to make this partnership work.
So from the probation standpoint, from Alyssa and I with Hennepin County Juvenile Probation, our role is really to be present at court to ensure that the eligible youth and be an advocate for the program so that youth can get ordered to it. And then Alyssa and I are responsible for getting probation officers involved in it as well. So in the pilot program, we had 8 probation officers a part of the pilot. We are at 6 at the current moment, excuse me, and bringing 6 more on. So before the end of the year, we will have a total of 12 probation officers that will be a part of the program. And what that means is every youth then that is ordered to the restorative justice disposition program is aligned with a probation officer who is very familiar with how a circle runs. And so we want to make sure that POs are aware of the time commitment that this is. So this is a really big time commitment, and it's a different approach than what they do with their normal traditional caseload. And so they go through ongoing training and learning about this program. So our role is to ensure that our POs are ready to go to be a part of this, to be a part of the program.
I can go next. So the International Academy of Trial Lawyers, actually, we have a board member at the Legal Rights Center, and that was part of our relationship there, which Dr. Tolfree spoke about at the beginning of how this program started and how all of the folks got brought together. And then the Legal Rights Center, being a criminal defense firm grounded in being run and by and for the people, means that we have a lot of relationships with people in the legal field. So that is judicial officers, that's defense attorneys, that's prosecutors, city attorneys, and those relationships are what helped bring everybody to the same table. And then I see my role with this work moving forward as the expanding of eligibility, taking the data and the hard work that Cara does to say, look at how successful and effective this is. Where can we do this more? How can we deepen this work? Where are the disparities in the work? And so I think that that's the big role that the Legal Rights Center hosts, is like relationships, the legal relationships, and the kind of like pushing the needle along, so that the community can continue to host restorative practices with more and more youth.
All right, Dr. Tolfree, did you want to add anything more about your participation before I move on?
You can go ahead and explain what you're doing and I'll come in after you.
Okay, so so go ahead and go to the next slide, Kara. So with Restorative Justice Community Action, we're the administrative organization for this program. And my role as part of that is helping to lead the administration and helping that it all works with the systems, that we provide the umbrella, like the insurance umbrella, the subcontracting with community circle keepers umbrella. We do all the data keeping. We have all the record keeping. So it's really about, we are providing that umbrella where the community can tap into and be part of this process, rather than it being all staff members. It's not about staff members providing a program. It's about the community being fully invested and participating in this program. So our circle keepers are community circle keepers who subcontract with us to provide that partnership for this process, so that youth are meeting with people in the community. So we help provide the framework for training, for the contracting with Hennepin County, and then subcontracting with the community providers, and then just making sure that the process flows smoothly from the systems to the community providers, and from the community providers back into the system, so that we are that organization that helps all of that happen, along with also participating in part of the work itself. But we do not do all the work ourselves. We provide the administrative role so that work can be done.
And my role here from Koinonia Leadership Academy, I was brought in by Legal Rights Center to help develop the program. So my role was to develop a restorative justice, restorative practices disposition program and the framework for it. And so with that framework, like Bo had brought forth before, Legal Rights Center had a lot of existing partnerships in the legal system, right? So we took that framework and we took it to the existing partners that we had to sort of develop this and make it come to fruition. And we invested a lot of time developing partnerships on the beginning of this. And so my role was to be able to help to bring those pieces together. I also help to recruit community restorative practices practitioners that are that can connect with our youth and have maybe had some of the same experiences, live in community with youth and with family, and then also provide restorative justice training for practitioners as well as our POs and other folks who are involved in the program. And so we're really deeply rooted in community partnerships. We work as a collaborative, as has been said a number of times throughout this process. So if folks are thinking about how do you replicate, how do you do this, it really is grounded in community partnerships and how you can work collaboratively together so that our youth and families are getting support all around from all of our different agencies as we work together to continue to provide this opportunity. All right, well, I think we're open for more questions, comments, thoughts that people might have about our program.
Talia, there's a question in the chat about the average time frame that a youth is under the restorative justice disposition program from intake to completion. Someone answer that one?
Yes, well, it typically could be 5, maybe 6 months. But if like we said, we design this as an individual process. So each youth comes to us in a different space, in a different place. Some youth are able to get through the process before those 5 or 6 months, but some youth need to be in the process that long. And it just kind of depends on where the youth are, how much support the youth has, what opportunities are available for the youth. And so it's really different for each youth that comes through, but on average, it's about 5 months. And then I also will add to that too, is that also depending on where the youth is, some of our youth have circles every week. Some of our youth have circles every other week. So it really depends on where the youth is.
The next question is that I love the program and the approach it takes on all aspects of the youth and their families. How difficult was it to sell this ideology for community buy-in? And I think we chuckle, or I did when I read it, because I think we spent probably the better half of a year probably trying to figure out how we were going to get the buy-in and then the buy-in of it. And I'll let Dr. Tolfree explain kind of our training processes that we were doing with the bench and county attorneys and then community as well, if you'd like.
And I also want to say we sat in circle a long time before we just kind of dove into this process. We sat in circle with community members. We did a lot of research around what community practitioners thought about this process, restorative practitioners, educators, community members, what they thought about restorative practices and offering this option to youth. So even before we began to talk to the county about this process, we were doing research and sort of evaluation on what community thought, because we wanted this program to really be community-based. And so, like Ashley was saying, we met with the county for more than a year before we actually really got started and engaged in a number of restorative practices trainings, engaged in a number of conversations, thoughts about where would be best for this program to start, what type of supports would be, who are the POs that might really take on this project and have that sort of restorative mindset, looking for a way to better touch our youth. And so a lot of investment and relationship building and listening and learning happened before we actually started the program.
I think Cynthia, you wanted to go in about the collaborative work with diversion.
Yeah, so I'd like just to add to it, all that deep work for it to happen in probation also was preceded by years of collaborative work by restorative practitioners at the police department level, at diversion level. So restorative partners have been working collaboratively, providing restorative alternatives to youth programming since well, for quite a while. I know that RJCA was involved in that since 2010. So, we've had a culture of moving more restorative practices into the criminal justice system, and with the lead of the Legal Rights Center and Dr. Tollfree and the IATL, it was they took that to the next level, and it does take a lot of work. It takes a lot of relationship building, but there's also been years of working towards that as community, asking for more ways and better ways to address youth incidents in a restorative manner. So this has had years of moving towards that direction, and then was really concentrated by Legal Rights Center and Dr. Tollfree and the International Association for Trial Lawyers.
The next question is about funding. How was the training cost covered, since it appears that most are working under the umbrella of their current professional obligations? Alyssa, I don't know if you want to talk about the funding from Hennepin County, that piece of it, and then Cynthia and anybody else.
Sure. This program actually started as a pilot through funding from the International Association of Trial Lawyers and our partnership with the Legal Rights Center. So that's how we started. We have since embedded the restorative disposition as part of our community-based array of services that we offer youth and families who are on supervision with juvenile probation. So we have, we as Hennepin County currently fund the disposition program, and that is that does cover training for probation staff. And I'll let Talea talk about any other training costs that are covered.
Yes, it covers training for probation. It also covers administrative pieces that we have through the program. And trying to think if there's anything else. Administrative and training is basically what we're focused on right now.
I would just like to add, it's not necessarily the circle keeper training, because that is because there's a lot of people who do restorative practices that have been trained. To Dr. Talea, there's a big circle of people, but we also that's kind of outside of the Hennepin County programming, but we find funding through other grants, through people paying for their own training. So that's how circle keepers are also, new circle keepers are being trained, as through funds outside this specific work.
And I'd just like to highlight that the county beginning to fund more of this goes to that sustainability piece at the beginning. One of the principles that's really important to this work is how do you sustain it, and not just have this be something that goes on for a year. And I think that connects to the data and the evaluation, and the more we're able to demonstrate that this is having meaningful impact for community and youth, then money follows that, or it ought to.
It also emphasizes the county's readiness for systems change and accountability. And so we really appreciate the partnership. We are getting constant feedback from judges, from POs, from court folks about how well the program is going and how supportive they are, and the transformation that they actually see when our youth are before them in court. So we really do appreciate the partnership and the level of accountability that has gone into the program.
Alyssa or Ashley, could you kind of talk about how this has impacted the probation officers, how they've seen or how you've seen them transform through this process?
Sure, I can start, and Ashley, you can certainly pitch in. I think it's been a process with the probation officers because it's giving away some of their control. The youth and the family gets to determine as part of the circle, like what are the next steps for them? How do they get back on track? And in traditional probation, that's something the probation officer would do. So I think, it was a little bit of a push in the beginning to give them, to get them to give this a try. But I think that they've absolutely come along. And we've gotten a lot of great feedback that this is so much more meaningful for the young people and helps build relationship between the young people and the family when they participate in this process versus the traditional process. Ashley, do you have anything else?
No, I was going to just say, yeah, I think you mentioned it, that this is, I think if we go to the next slide, I think there's just one more question, Cara, that we could lead into, but how is it different? And so it's different because when youth are ordered to this specific program, the Restorative Justice Dispo program, the judge, I will say, is not allowed, but we all know they can kind of probably do whatever they want. But our request has been that they're not to order any other specific programming or orders. So when a youth goes through the traditional process, we will see a court order that states specific type of programming. We will see that they're ordered to do drug testing, that they're ordered to do 20 hours of community service. And so what we have asked in this program is to not order any of those specific things and allow the circle to determine what type of programming would be best and conditions would be best for the youth. And so that is different. And I think when we were talking about the buy-in, that's where the buy-in was a struggle with in the beginning with the county attorneys and a little bit of the judges, because when they leave court, they know exactly what the youth is going to be held to and be accountable for. And when they're ordered to this program, it's different because it takes a little bit to figure out what's going to be best for the youth. And so not only was probation losing a little bit of that control, so were the courts and the county attorney's office. And so, yeah, so that's the piece of it. The other thing I'll just say is I think it's different is, like I think we mentioned here on this slide, is that the restitution is still the same. So that process has not changed at all. If the youth, if the victim comes forward and has an affidavit or documentations for a monetary loss, that is still processed exactly the same like it would in the traditional process. And I think Talia talked a lot, but in Hennepin County, we see a lot of stay of adjudications. So what that means is that the youth is not adjudicated at the time at disposition, and they get 6 months to remain law-abiding and follow the conditions along with what is ordered at the in the circle. And so those are 6 months. So that's why Talia was mentioning about that 5-month mark. It's because there's a review date scheduled for 5.5 months out. And so our hope is to try to get the circles wrapped up in that, the program done by then. There are oftentimes it's just not possible. There's a lot of complications that happen in situations, and more often than not, we struggle to get a hold of youth. We're in the midst of a pandemic at the moment, and I think in the very beginning we even struggled. We did this pilot and we started in January of 2020, and 3 months in, the world flipped, and we were in person, and then all of a sudden we were virtual, and court was virtual, and so we had to pivot quickly. And so again, when the review hearing would come back up, the probation officer would work with the circle keepers and say, I think we need more time. And so we would ask for an extension of another 6 months on that stay, and so that we could have more time to finish it up. Yeah, go ahead, Talia.
Yeah, I was just going to add that it's been a really healing and accountability process for all. I've seen POs enter to the process, kind of thinking, okay, what's going on here? After they've been a part of the process, just really amazed about the amount of opening up that youth are doing, the amount of connection and relationship building, whereas in the past it may have taken a little longer, but being in the circle process, being in that intimate space where we create it so that it's safe for youth, we learn a lot about youth much quicker than the traditional process. And POs are beginning to see us as partners and collaborating together as a team, and not so much of I'm giving my power over to the circle keepers, but it's more like we are working as a team together and we are really impacting and transforming youth. And so it's very powerful on not just the youth level of healing, but even our POs, even parents, all the people that are involved really gets that opportunity to see our youth in a different light and to also evaluate what processes have they been using in the past that they might need to change.
Can I just add into that? You know, in the traditional process, there's siloing of responsibilities, so that what the circle does is it brings back that conversation so that we can have conversations around each of the things. Even if they go to a different program, we bring that back, and we often invite the program person to come into circle to talk about how it went and to support that youth. So what we're doing is we're creating a larger circle as we grow more often than not, because we're bringing in people who have had some touch points. So it's not in isolation, but it's in building a stronger network. And then one last thing that I wanted to bring up was, you know, victims. I know people didn't really ask questions about that, but in the process of, if there's a victim in the case, the circle keepers do not reach out to the victims. It still goes through the victim advocate at Hennepin County. So the probation officer will reach out to the victim advocate and say, this is what we're doing. Is a victim wanting to participate in some way? A lot of times they will say no, but they also say, we're glad that they're getting this opportunity. I want them to grow from this process. So when we do get responses from victims, that's often what we get, rather than being fully involved. Although sometimes the victims are sometimes within the family unit, and they have participated in that process. I don't know if anybody else has anything else to add about victims on that.
I was just gonna say, yeah, oftentimes we don't see them participate in the circle, and that's okay, because that's not a part of the circle. And I think, you know, when I first came into this work, when I hear restorative justice or restorative practices, I think, wow, the victim's going to be a part of this circle. And then when they're not, you know, that it just has that feeling towards it. I will say, from the probation standpoint, we often do get reach out from the victim or the victim advocate and ask how the youth did in the program. You know, not for a lack of better term, is there remorse? You know, is he or she sorry? Are they sorry? So oftentimes they don't participate, but it doesn't mean that they're not still involved in some way.
And I'll just add, Cynthia, you talked about the silos and the traditional model of probation. And I think one of the things I'm most proud of about this work is the silos that we've broken down and the team that we've created amongst our different agencies, and the work that we've done by starting a program in a global pandemic and continuing it, and been able to continue to serve young people and families. And, you know, very proud that we've embedded this as part of our work in Hennepin County and embraced it as a meaningful practice and a way to give youth voice in their future. So very proud of the work and very thankful for the partnerships.
Well, I believe we might be at time, but if there's any other quick questions or anything folks want to add or share, this would be the time. Oh, we were just informed we have 5 more minutes. Any more questions?
I'll just say, so we started it as a pilot. We wrapped it up at the end of 2020 and turned it into a program at the beginning or maybe mid-year somewhere along here. And so in 2022, our goal is to have 60 youth involved in the program throughout 2022.
And I suppose I'll just add that it's, oh yeah, maybe I could end with this poem. I'll add that it's exciting because all of this work and the evaluation that we've done means I can go to other counties and other jurisdictions and say, look at this beautiful work that we're doing. Because a lot of the folks who are working with youth do it because they care and they want to do something that will change, and that shift in mindset. Now we have data and can support that and get buy-in and approach other judges and decision makers to, restore some of that power back to the community. But yeah, if there aren't any other questions, I'm happy to end with a poem if you'd like. Okay. I'm going to pull up this poem by Luis Valdez, and I'll read it in Spanish first. And it's in Lakesh, because it's actually a Mayan inspired poem that's in Spanish. So, tú eres mi otro yo. Si te hago daño a ti, me hago daño a mí mismo. Si te amo y respeto, me amo y respeto yo. You are my other me. If I do harm to you, I do harm to myself. If I love and respect you, I love and respect myself.
Thanks for reading that, Bo. And I think if there aren't any more questions, we can give folks a couple minutes of their morning back, depending on where you are in the country.
Again, thank you all for joining us. We appreciate you investing time in us in this way. And our contact information should be available on the website if there are further questions. Thank you.